Did you know that the beginning of the Book of Mormon wasn't the intended beginning of the Book of Mormon? Joseph Smith, founder of the Mormon Church, said in 1827 that he dug up a set of golden plates that contained a record of ancient Christian people that he was in charge of translating, which would become the Book of Mormon. Well, a guy named Martin Harris was an early believer of Joseph Smith and decided to give Joe what would be about $1,500 in today's money to finance the translation. Martin's wife, Lucy, also wanted to donate some of her money, and when she asked to see the plates, Joe said, "In relation to assistance, I always prefer dealing with men rather than their wives." So basically, he said, bitch, no. And this response doesn't sit well with Lucy and doesn't fill her with a lot of confidence in Joe, so she kind of holds on to some doubts, hoping that Joe isn't trying to defraud her and her husband. She had even tried to search the Smith home one time, and Joe was like, I don't actually need them here physically for the translation. They're hidden out in the woods nearby. Good luck finding them. So anyway, Martin ends up being scribe for Joe as he dictates the translation from the plates, and the whole time Martin can hear his wife's voice, like in his head, being a little skeptical. So he asks Joe if he can see the plates, and Joe says no. So he asks if he can take home some of the pages of the manuscript to show his wife that it's real, and Joe says no. And Martin is like, all right, but can I take some of the pages home of the manuscript so I can show my wife that it's real? And Joe says no. And he's like, okay, but hear me out. What if I take home a few of the pages from the manuscript to show my wife it's real? So then Joe finally relents and is like, fine, okay, the Lord said you could take them home to your wife or whatever, but you can only show them to these 5 people, okay? Swear it, swear it! So Martin solemnly pinky swears he will only show them to those 5 people. Well, Martin proceeds to show these pages to absolutely everyone who comes by the house. They decided to lock the pages in Lucy's bureau, but on one occasion, Martin had picked the lock and it damaged the lock, and then, like, cool, next time they go to get the pages, gasp, they're gone. Joe is dealing with a personal tragedy of his wife giving birth to their first child who died, and his wife almost died herself. So then Martin finally has to come to the Smith home, and he has to confess that the pages have gone missing, and Joe is like, well, search your house again! But they were good and gone, and Joe was pretty bummed, and he blamed himself, and then he officially started his first written revelation that would become the Doctrine and Covenants, or D&C, which is another Mormon scripture book, in which he made his very first entry about how Martin was terribly wicked. So those lost pages were the Book of Lehi, and they were supposed to be the true beginning of the Book of Mormon, but instead it starts with the Book of Nephi, who is Lehi's son. Joe said that God told him not to retranslate that section, but rather that it was all foreseen by God from the very writing of the Book of Mormon, and that the Book of Nephi contained a summary of the events from the Book of Lehi for this purpose, which, if I were Lehi, would make me pretty freaking mad that I had tediously labored over making this record just for it to be destined to be lost and a waste of time. Realistically, it makes more sense that Joe had to come up with an excuse because he knew he couldn't reproduce the story exactly, which would be problematic since so many people had seen the pages. So he had to come up with an excuse to just scrap it and start over. If you want to know more about what is in the Book of Mormon, I have a series on my YouTube where I tell you stories of the Book of Mormon, but like in a fun way. Go check it out. Feel free to follow along for more Mormon/religious talk. Yeah, thanks for hanging out with me. I love you. Bye.